Imagine the very first day of filming on a major movie. The cameras are ready, the cast is set, everyone is excited to start. But on the very first take, the lead actor, cast to play the hulking, terrifying monster, suddenly collapses. The producers realize that he lied about his physical ability and is now in the hospital with a heat stroke. The entire project is on the brink of disaster before it even begins. And this is exactly what happened on the set of the 2003 remake of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. A story that, look, as we get going into this thing here today on Podio Commentary, it really does kind of set the tone. All right. It sets the tone for like attempting to remake a beloved 1974 classic. And it's weird to say that the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre is a beloved movie, but it is with certain people. It is a masterclass in tension building and terror, and doing it without necessarily needing to lead into the gore, which is the exact opposite of what this movie did. You know what I mean, right? Because this movie was setting a chaotic and physically brutal tone for everything it was attempting to do. All right. And as I mentioned in that cold open there, the entire production was built around this idea of creating something chaotic and physically brutal in order to be different than the original, but to play into this more reimagined type world that Michael Bay's Platinum Dunes had wanted to do. And, when we get into these movies here on Podio Commentary, one of the things that I like to do is really dive into the history. And I finally sat down to watch this movie for the first time last night. I watched this and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the beginning, back to back, which we will talk about that when I get to that episode, probably tomorrow. But this is one that I had avoided for over 2 decades, largely, because the original is so good. And it's so influential, and it's so different than what we have now. And, especially 20 years ago when we were into the torture porn, when we were into the gore. I mean, we're still there, but I feel like we're in a renaissance of horror movies in the 2020s that we weren't in the early 2000s. Right? Because moving away from like maybe some of the more like exploitative stuff coming out of the 70s and the more, I don't want to say necessarily experimental, but like high concept horror that we had in the 80s, going back to this story and trying to retell this story and to modernize it in a way of how audiences would respond to it, I feel was a very tough thing to do. Okay. Now, if you don't know, here are some of the specifics about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 2003. It was directed by Marcus Nispel. That name might sound familiar because he went on to go direct the Friday the 13th film from 2009, the last Jason film that we've had in the last decade and a half plus some. And that movie has also met with kind of like, I don't want to say middling response. Some people really like it. Some people really don't like it. I recently bought the 4K from Arrow, so when I dive into that, I'll be talking about it, definitely going into spooky season. I did also, by the way, just get Jason X on 4K during the Arrow sale. Very excited to dive into that one, which you might actually give me a bit of a hard time for that because that movie is bad. It's not great, but it has like a charm to it. It's a charm that I don't necessarily feel like Marcus Nispel knows really how to do because this was his first movie. Otherwise he had done like music videos. So this was his first movie. And then he went on to go do, Pathfinder with Carl Urban, which was a really interesting high concept movie, about a Viking left with Native Americans who have to then fight the other Vikings when they return. I mean, you had Clancy Brown in the villain role. I mean, it was really great. Even Conan the Barbarian, kind of the same thing with Jason Momoa. It was violent, it was dark. But the thing with Marcus Nispel that I just want to start off with, and I've been saying this now since ever, is that the man is all style and no substance. right? He knows how to make something look good. He knows how to make something look visceral. He knows how to make it look like it needs to look. But his storytelling ability as a director is something that I feel has never truly been backed up by maybe great screenplays. And that is something that is here as well, because this was written by Scott Kosar, who this was his first movie as well. So when you have the newly formed Platinum Dunes, which I'll be talking about, and they're like, hey, let's go and reboot the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Let's bring in an inexperienced director and an inexperienced screenwriter to reimagine probably the most influential horror movie in the past 50 years. Right? Like, this is something where I feel like the pedigree needs to maybe be a little bit like higher with that one. Okay. You know what I'm saying? But again, the movie itself had a fair amount of problems, as I started off by talking about with the whole thing with the actor, you know, getting heat stroke and almost tanking the entire project. They were able to reach out to Andrew Brynissarski, I'm probably mispronouncing that, who had been considered for the role of Leatherface earlier. He was a last-minute replacement who went on to do a very good job for not only this movie, but the beginning, Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the beginning anyway, the direct prequel. And that was a good call. I thought he was able to kind of bring that energy pretty well. I will just start off by saying I liked him. There's a shot in the movie when he puts on the face of Jessica Biel's boyfriend, and that is like probably the most like horrifying scene in the movie, just because like it's in the headlights of the van and he turns and you it looks like the actor, I forget the actor's name, but it looks like that guy, like Kemper, you know, and it just like, kind of creepy. But then like he takes it off and puts on the old mask afterward. It's a little bit of inconsistency on that one towards the end, but then again, it is what it is. So why don't we just, let's dive into the history of this movie before we start talking about it directly. So this remake, like I said, was kind of like meant to set the stage for things to come. It was meant to be a blueprint for how Hollywood could make horror films at a time when they wanted to really lean in to the disgusting and the macabre and the violent and the gory. And I don't necessarily want to say with even like the best stories, right? I mean, they were also adapting all the Japanese horror films at this time, right? Like, you'll never convince me that like The Grudge is a good movie. The Ring is good for like a one-time watch, and then after that, nothing else should ever be seen on it again. And the same thing goes for The Grudge. But Hollywood cannot resist doing sequels, remakes, reboots, and this movie, despite being like the blueprint for that, it kind of set a bad tone, to be fair. Now, the project was the very first from Platinum Dunes, which was co-founded by Michael Bay. Their main goal was to take older horror classics and give them a modern and glossy update, right? Think about that, right? So instead of this was a problem of 20 years ago. And we're not seeing it as much now. Now I feel like there's more care given to these horror stories. There's more agency given to the actual narrative. The characters actually have more characteristics, I guess, right? Like your final girl can actually be interesting. And that's, I think, something that's really good for horror right now. We're in this fantastic horror place. But going back 20 years ago, they still didn't really care, right? And so even going to Marcus Nispel, right? This was his first movie, like I said, but he actually was a bit on the hesitant side. He called the idea of remaking the original blasphemy, you know, and that's pretty fair, to be honest with you. And his hesitation, you know, like really does show that he did have a respect for the original film. And I think he did try to like lean into the suspense at times while also then giving into what Michael Bay wanted, which is, you know, like the gore, the you know, the more like violence, the visceral stuff, right? Because like the first kill in the movie is the girl that kills herself. And it's like, it's really messed up. It's meant to kind of shock the audience, right? Like, why would this girl, you know, that this traumatized hitchhiker pull a gun from her dress, which, by the way, I just want to point out, it's not entirely clear if she pulled the gun from like inside of her vagina and then put it in her mouth and pulled the trigger. You know what I mean? Like, it's not inherently clear where the gun came from, because there was a lot of smeared blood on her inner thigh, which made me think that there was, some assault stuff happening. And clearly the baby at the end of the movies was meant to be, I think, hers. Or if not, they did not do a very good job at conveying the story of that. You get the general idea, but you never get any other backstory about who that girl was, who really that baby is, where that family came from. I mean, I guess it's kind of irrelevant overall, but at the same time, I don't know. Now, the story was written, like I said, by Scott Kosar, and he decided he wanted to go in and change a lot of the ideas from the original film. He wanted to maintain the core idea: a group of young people fall victim to, backwards killers and cannibals and things like that. But he decided to give Leatherface an identity. He called them Thomas Brown Hewitt, right? Part of the Hewitt family, the only real family in this town, outside of the tea lady, and Henrietta, I believe was that woman's name. And so instead of just kind of like, running into the family like they do in the original film, they end up picking up a hitchhiker, like I said, the woman, who then sees that they're driving back towards the house. Never mind, they don't turn around in the vehicle. That part got a little confusing. She's walking traumatized down the road. They put her in the car. They're driving. Maybe they're driving back towards the gas station, and that's what she freaked out by. But she freaks out. She says, you're all dead. You don't even know it yet," or something along those lines. Pulls out the gun and shoots herself. And it's a cool shot. But it's also like, why, and there was a bit of the thing at the very end of the movie where Jessica Biel's character does the exact same thing. And I understand the idea of it being cyclical, right? Of her being pushed to the brink psychologically and emotionally and mentally to where she would have that kind of reaction, but she regains her footing a lot faster than this woman did. But we also don't know how long this woman was there. And we don't necessarily know all that they did to her. However, when you watch Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the beginning, you start to see a lot, especially with, I think, Blair's character, or Bailey, whatever her name was, like what they do to her or what they were intending on doing to her is something that they probably did to this woman. Because I feel like the beginning was like the beginning, and then they kind of honed their skills as time went on. They honed what they wanted to do, especially Sheriff Hoyt, played wonderfully, by the way, by R. Lee Ermey. If I ever go back to these movies again, and I'm not too sure if I will, but if I ever go back to these movies again, it will because I want to watch R. Lee Ermey just go nuts, because he brings that Marine drill instructor energy along with like just absolute psychosis to the role of Sheriff Hoyt. And I just thought he was really, really, really good. And he made every scene just a lot of fun to watch because he was just psychotic and crazy and everything else. And so, again, like there's issues I have with how that whole thing happens in the beginning of the movie, obviously. But then, you're also wondering, why aren't the cops giving more of a shit? What's going on with all that? We learn more about that in the beginning. So it's almost like I don't know if I want to say you should watch the beginning first and then watch the remake, because probably a lot of the like, oh dang moments would probably come from watching the beginning, especially on those plot holes that are like filled in with the prequel. You know what I mean? So it's kind of crazy with that one. But when they wanted to cast this film, and they wanted to find the right group of people, they wanted to find a bunch of up and comers, and they wanted to get a couple veteran actors. This is where R. Lee Ermey would come on in. But for the main role of Erin, the final girl, they chose Jessica Biel because at the time she was well known for being on the show Seventh Heaven. And at that point, she was kind of doing what John Stamos did back in the late 80s and early 90s when he wanted to shed his like good boy persona and try doing some darker stuff. So she was like trying to shed like the Christian family melodrama that was Seventh Heaven and become more of a mainstream movie star. So she actually fought really hard to get this role, and she beat out other actresses apparently like Kirsten Dunst and Katie Holmes. I don't know if either one would have done well or better, right? Kirsten was coming off as Spider-Man at that point in time, so I think it would have just been like way too much. But it's also kind of like Lily Sobieski in Joyride. You know, it's like they kind of had these up and coming actresses in these movies that are all pretty good, you know. But it's just like, can we really now going back? Could we see Kirsten Dunst in the role of Erin? I don't think she could have portrayed that. I mean, I could be wrong. Katie Holmes probably would have done okay. She probably would have done all right. But, you know, but at the same time, like Eliza Dushku could have been good. But then again, we got that with Wrong Turn. You see what I'm saying here, where you have like all of these movies that kind of by and large followed the same formula, and you can kind of interchange your actress and to give them a role that's going to kind of work out well. But the reason why they wanted Biel was in part because of what she wanted to do, right? She was determined to play this as a strong, capable hero. She didn't just want to be helpless. She spoke out about wanting to make the character a powerful woman who would make audiences feel like they could cheer her on. She even convinced the producers to reshoot a scene because she felt her performance wasn't strong enough. And that's really good on her part. And you could tell, like, as it progresses and we get to, you know, we start to see like everything just kind of focus around her as all the other characters start getting picked off one by one, you know, and she becomes the final girl. She does really emote a lot, which I thought was pretty good. Even though, again, one of the things I have with this movie and even the other movie is that, like, it's in Texas at night, and yet there's like no, you know, like there's a lot of suspensions of disbelief. One of the key things was like the basement is completely flooded, right? It's like dripping water. Sure, that's aesthetic design that's meant to make it look like dank and dark and whatever. When Mike Vogel is down there and everything else, but it doesn't rain, I think, until like the end of the movie. Otherwise, it's dry as hell because it's Texas in the summer, and yet the basement is like dripping with water. You see what I'm saying there, right? There's that style that Nispel brings to it, but it doesn't really work until you get to like the end of the movie when it actually rains. You know what I'm saying? So I'm just saying, right? There's all that. Now, the role of Leatherface, like I said, went to Andrew, but at one point they actually wanted to bring in someone with more gravitas. They wanted to bring in someone who could actually like physically play the role in a way that audiences would be excited to see, I think. And so they actually reached out to Dolph Lundgren, but he turned it down because he wanted to spend more time with his family. And I think Lundgren would have been an interesting actor in the role. But at the same time, it's kind of like, I don't know. I think he would have been too distracting, right? Because he would, because go watch a Gunner in like the first Expendables movie. You know, they gave him more to do as time went on, but Dolph Lundgren in the early 2000s wasn't really doing much. You know, he wasn't really up to much that I remember. The last thing I really remember him in before Expendables was that movie Blackjack, straight to video Blackjack, that was directed by John Woo, when in actuality that was meant to be a pilot for a television series, and they just turned it into a movie. So it's basically like a John Woo directed, Dolph Lundgren starring action movie with a TV pilot budget that was shot in Canada and then released as a direct-to-video. I should probably talk about that film on its own because it's an interesting movie if you've never seen it. But I don't know if Lundgren would have been able to really kind of like do the physicality, right? Even Brett Wagner, the one that they chose, that ended up having the heat stroke, like wasn't ready for the physical demands. And that is a reality when you're playing something like this, and so when they brought in Andrew Bryniarski, whatever, I'm mispronouncing, he did take the role pretty seriously. He only ate white bread and brisket to gain the weight for the part that he needed, reaching nearly 300 pounds. On top of that, he wore a special suit that added another pounds to him, turning him into that really hulking, nasty, frightening killer. And again, like, he really kind of played it off as he's going through. Like, he is just kind of larger than life. Like, he is an imposing threat that I thought was actually pretty good. But like I said, the most memorable performance in the movie comes from R. Lee Ermey. And at that point, man, like I said, he brought that Marine drill instructor energy. And his performance apparently was so convincing that Jonathan Tucker, who played Morgan, said he forced himself to throw up with each take of a scene where Ermey's character put a gun in his mouth, right? Like, that scene was actually really good. When Ermey and Jonathan Tucker are in the back of the car and Ermey's like getting him to recreate what happened with the girl who killed herself. And just that whole line of like, I don't have an imagination. I need you to show me. That was actually like really good acting. That was actually like really, really solid, because Jonathan Tucker, like at one point, his lower lip just starts to tremble. Like you can tell that character is fearful for his life. And then of course, like Arlie Ermey is just messing with them the whole time. I thought it was great. I thought it was pretty awesome. They really, I think brought it in some ways on that one. Probably the most interesting thing about it though, was that the cinematographer, Daniel Pearl, was the same guy who shot the original 1974 film. They got him to come back to shoot the remake 30 years later. And what he did is he used this technique called bleach bypass to give the film a very specific visual style. A lot of what this did was skipping part of the film development process. So it resulted in this kind of like harsh, high contrast look with deep black shadows and muted colors. One of the reasons why, I guess, according to my notes here, is that director Marcus Nispel wanted the film to look like puke. And his technique kind of helped achieve that gritty, sickly feel, which again is almost like kind of like unnecessary in some ways. You know what I mean? It's like the original, it was low budget, very low budget. It felt dark and grimy, and it just had that feel about it. And they didn't have to go back in and try to recreate it. They were able to, on the fly, make it look and feel a certain way. But that was also aided by the fact that they weren't using a lot of gore, that it was a lot of tension, and it was a lot of implied violence. And the implied violence does a lot to your imagination. It does a lot to your mentality when you're watching these movies. This movie didn't necessarily leave a lot to the imagination, albeit a lot of the stuff I felt was kind of done off screen, right? So when Pepper, the other girl, gets killed by him, like he just cuts her in the back real quick with the chainsaw, and then Jessica Biel just watches her get just sliced up. And that's it. No blood. Just chicken feathers. Because like there was chicken feathers right there, right? That was it. But then he turns back, and that's when you see like the face of her ex or of her boyfriend, like Kemper, on his face. So that was actually really cool. And maybe they did that at that point in time as a way to kind of like tone the audience down for the initial gore, for then that reveal of the face, which was actually pretty good. Albeit, again, when Kemper died, he gets hit in the head with the sledgehammer, and then he gets strung up after being in the tub, and then we don't really see much after that with him. We don't ever see him die. Mike Vogel's character we see die because he has Jessica Biel kill him, because the guy has lost his leg and he is up on a meat hook that he tried getting himself off of, only to fall deeper on the meat hook, which was actually a pretty cool scene. A lot of good sound effects, good sound design on that one, and so that was actually pretty good. But then Jonathan Tucker, he gets killed later on by very similar, Leatherface picks him up and, puts him on the chandelier because he's got handcuffs on, so he can't go anywhere, and then just cuts off his leg, and that's where he dies. And it's just like, again, similar kill beats, similar violence beats. What was really fascinating though, just to kind of go back to the Mike Vogel thing, when he chops off his leg, he then takes salt and he packs it into the wound, right? To almost cauterize it. And then he seals it off. Obviously I think he's trying to protect the meat from spoiling, and this is, again, these are things that we kind of see play out in the beginning, where it's like every plot hole that they had or plot device that was never fully explained, they went back to the second movie and they're like, okay, or the prequel, like, okay, let's address this. Let's address this, and this. And it almost makes discussing this movie now more interesting, because like anything you're like, well, that was kind of crazy, all right. There's that, right? Okay. So when they finished the movie, they went into the editing bay. There was a couple plot points that they decided that they were going to cut out. One of them was that it was going to be revealed that Erin was actually pregnant with Kemper's child, which I assumed because they alluded to it in the beginning when they're in the van and she's talking about wanting to get a ring on her finger. And she's, he offers her a joint and she tosses it out the window, and she didn't drink in Mexico because those are all indicators of being pregnant, right? That was something that they were setting up, right? They made it out to be, oh, she's just hungover or whatever. She drank the water is what they said. But no, they were already setting up that she was going to be pregnant. I'm kind of glad they didn't do that. But what they did do, on the other hand, is they alluded, like when Kemper got strung up and the diamond ring fell out of his pocket and Leatherface picks it up and looks at it. Like, so at that point, we as the audience know he was intending on marrying her, which is what she wanted. They'd been together for 3.5 years. And that was really interesting because that was one of those like, moments, that was a good moment. That was a solid moment for that emotional depth in the film of like that, if they just would have kept on going, life would have been totally different, And so it would have been, that would have been, I think, kind of a bad thing to have that, but another deleted scene was kind of an alternate opening and ending. Instead of having the narrator and having it be like the documentary, it would have been a flashback told by an older Aaron who had since been locked in a mental hospital since the events. And the alternate ending would have revealed that Leatherface was still alive and had only one arm, which no one believed. And then both of those ideas were basically killed off for kind of a more direct and fast-paced story, which makes sense. Having John Larroquette, by the way, voice the narration in the opening and ending of the movie, especially I think even with the beginning, to kind of bookend that documentary vibe to it, or made for TV vibe is kind of what I was getting. It was good. It was good. Also, the other thing too, by the way, that got me was Harry Knowles has a cameo in the movie. He's beheaded. His head's on a platter. Talk about taking you out of the film. I don't mean that in a negative. Like, Harry is Harry. I've always liked Harry. He's got some issues. I've always enjoyed Ain't It Cool. I've always kind of like, I always look back on the kind of stuff from Ain't It Cool from 20 years ago. And I'm like, man, God, if only we could go back to that kind of movie talk where it was like fast paced and exciting. And now it's all like lies and hyperbole and whatnot. But that was kind of fascinating to see. So the movie has a lot of really good moments in it, right? Like, you truly do hate the bad guys, not just like, Sheriff Hoyt, who is awesome, but like there's the whole thing with like everyone in the town, everyone around them is entirely like complicit, and everyone around them is entirely involved. And it's like, what do they get out of it? Why are they doing it? Well, you don't know. Right? You think it's just some backwards town, just backwards people, and they don't know why any, like that's kind of the thing is like, why is the lady in the mobile home with the Henrietta with the baby? What is that all about? Right? Like, obviously the baby was stolen, and that was the whole reason why at the end of the movie, when, just this part got me, is at the end of the movie, when she runs away, she flags down the trucker, gets in there, he starts driving back. She does the exact same thing that the woman at the beginning of the movie did. And then, she's like tugging at the wheel, and he stops in front of the convenience store, which magically has everybody in it at that moment in time. She then escapes out, sees that the baby is inside, then steals the baby without them hearing her or seeing anything, obviously blocked by the sound of the rain, which makes sense. Gets into the cop car, hot wires it, and then kills Arlie Ermy, and then drives over, backs up and kills him, runs over him to make sure that he's dead. What dawned on me at that point in time, and you can even look at this through the lens of like the beginning as well. Ty West should probably be sued for idea theft, because X and Pearl are almost like, those were almost lifted completely from these two films. Go back and watch them again, and then watch X and Pearl, and you're going to be like, oh, wow. Thematically, and even some core ideas. Yeah. Ty West was heavily influenced by this, in my opinion. That being said, X is still one of my favorite films. I love it. But this movie, it's good in so many ways, but it's also like just kind of a one-time watch for me. And like I said, unless I want to go back and watch something with like Arlie Ermy or whatever. But the movie itself did quite well. It did very well. in regards to the box office, right? It earned just over 29 million in its opening weekend. It opened October 17th, 2003. It had a budget of $9.5 million, went on to gross 108 million worldwide, which is, I mean, if you think about that, that is an 1100% return on investment, which is pretty great. You know, it was like Kill Bill Volume 1 had just opened up, I think, the week before. And so that was doing really well, you know, and so it was up against that. That's probably why I didn't see it, you know. That's probably one of the reasons why, because I was working at the drive-in. We got Kill Bill Volume 1. We never got Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I think a big reason for that too was like the owner was like really kind of against getting a lot of like slasher films at the time, despite the fact that when we had like The Grudge and we had The Ring and we had other horror movies like 13 Ghosts, you know, and whatever, Ghost Ship, we did pretty well. People like watching horror movies, especially at a drive-in, even if it's dark and harder to see. But at that point in time, this is something completely you guys will never know about, but we had these new lamp house boxes that actually increased our brightness by a solid like 60%. So horror movies were a lot easier to see. And we had already had those around that point in time. So we could have probably gotten it and it probably would have looked pretty good and everything else. But the thing was, though, look, this $9.5 million movie grossing as much as it did, it made it one of the highest grossing films in the entire history of the franchise. And that was, again, a big turning point for Hollywood, looking at this, you know, this under $10 million horror movie remake that grossed 1,100%. What it cost to make is obviously going to then be something that people are interested in. So what do? They did a whole bunch of horror remakes in the years that followed, all produced by Platinum Dunes. So remember, it's the thing. Now, the movie itself did not do very well with critics. It got a 37% on Rotten Tomatoes, a 38% on Metacritic, both generally showing unfavorable reviews. Roger Ebert gave the film a rare 0-star review, famously saying here, "There is not a shred of reason to see it." I'm going to disagree. R. Lee Ermey is the reason to see it, if anything. But the movie did do a B+ cinema score, which is actually pretty good for a horror film. Most of the time, horror films nowadays kind of come on in at that like C+, B-, C+ range. Sinners and Weapons, neither of which I'd call a horror movie, more on the thriller front. Maybe in the case of Weapons, definitely not Sinners. Nothing about that movie is a horror movie. Fight me on it if you want to. We'll have that discussion. But anyway, both of those got A- cinema scores. So obviously people like it. But look, there was a lot of good performances in the movie, right? Jonathan Tucker was good. Jessica Biel was good. R. Lee Ermey was goated. I'm just going to sit there and like really give it up. I liked the idea of them trying, to like add in the documentary part of it in the beginning and the end, kind of adding to the like the lore and the mystery. I kind of enjoyed that. But obviously from there, that led to a bunch of other movies attempting the exact same thing, which is unfortunate. But I gotta say, it's a movie that is now out on 4K. You might like it, you might not like it. It is worth a watch, even if it's like a one-time watch for me. But I am always curious to know your guys' thoughts, your guys' opinions. Let me know down in the comment section here on YouTube. I always appreciate everybody. And let's get back into it. I'll be talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the beginning next. I have a lot to say about that, as well as K-pop Demon Hunters is coming up. The Rundown is coming up, and a whole bunch of movies are coming up. So just stay tuned for that. Like the video, please subscribe. I'll talk to you guys later. Have yourself a great one. Thank you again, and peace out.